Welcome, folks, to the 15th of November 2023 Aries Working Group call. We have some cool topics today. Get to the agenda in just a second. There's a Hyperledger call, so the antitrust policy and the code of conduct are in effect. Those links, can be found in the agenda, or the agenda link is newly pasted into the chat for those that would like to see it or update it in any way. You're welcome to add yourself to the attendees list and to help other folks locate you and help us know who is present during different conversations. Is there anyone new today that would like to introduce themselves?
Yeah, I'm new.
Want to say hi for a second? Tell us
Yeah,
a little
my
about
name's
yourself.
Jamie Hale. I've been working with BC Gov for the last few months, and yeah, I think I'm presenting first. So
You are on the agenda.
yeah,
We appreciate you being here. Excellent. Welcome, Jamie. I think I recognize everyone else. Awesome. Announcements. Next Thursday is U.S. holiday for Thanksgiving. I know the Canadians do it on an entirely different schedule, but with Wednesday being just the day before, the question is open about whether we want to hold next week or whether we want to cancel next week. Any opinions? There are no opinions.
No opinion. Deathly silence.
As a non-US citizen, I'll leave it to relevant people to decide.
Yes, Sam, take the day off.
There you go. There's one opinion.
Is this all the people that are not U.S. citizens taking pity on U.S. citizens? Is that what's happening here?
Yes.
Any other opinions? Well, Alex or Warren, you're the only one that expressed that, so we have 1-0 here.
I think the fact that you raised it as a topic as well suggests it might be a good idea.
Well, I just didn't want to, assume that interrupt people's planned family time for stuff like this. So, and it varies on which days people take off when it shows up in the middle of a week like this. So, okay, we'll call it no meeting next week then. If there's no violent opinions that we should have it. Okay, any other announcements we should have on the list but don't? Any release status or work updates from various Aries projects to share?
I'll mention about Akapai. So we are very close to a 011. I think there's one more PR that we want to finish off. We'll do an RC1 and then release that. Then we will retain a 011.x branch and continue to do patch updates to that. The next release after that, non-patch release, the next minor update will include minor or major upgrade. I'm not sure. Will include support for a non-creds RS. So there you go.
Awesome.
One from me. So for Aries VCX, I updated the notes here under the Aries VCX point. So there's going to be some repo restructuring we're going to be doing, which sounds like, it's not really impactful in technical terms to anyone, but it's quite significant for us because it's gonna underline the fact that our repository Aries VCX is no longer purely Aries only implementation, but there's other Aries agnostic components which we in fact want to start publishing on Crates.io, perhaps build isolated pipelines and have separate versioning for those as time go. So that would be, for example, Rust, the dog implementation, some builders and data model and all that stuff. Same for DIDs, DID parser, DID resolvers, and as well as some higher level abstraction ledger clients like modular Indy ledger client we have built on top of IndyVDR, but with additional caching and pluggable transaction submitter and stuff like that, as well as uncreds resolver / hopefully resolvers in the future. So we would like to grow. Basically, we are growing. Although the name of the repo is right now Aries VCX, and our kind of main product at the moment is Aries VCX the crate, which is the Aries implementation. There's other generally useful components, and I want to highlight that. So that's it for us.
Very cool. Thank you, Patrick.
Sam, because Stephen didn't mention it, he gave an excellent demo in the ACA Hub meeting yesterday of a new thing that's been stood up by BC Gov called Traction. And I think a few words from Stephen on it might be worthwhile for people to hear.
Sure. Traction's been in work for a while, but what I demonstrated yesterday was a live instance of Traction that anyone can use, anyone can sign up for and begin to play with. And it's a pretty good tool for getting started in the community. And I did a demo of me babbling and in about 15 minutes did an entire from scratch flow from creating a tenant in the sandbox environment to becoming an issuer, creating a credential, issuing a credential, connecting with a mobile wallet, and creating a credential. And then the powerful thing about it is with a tenant in the sandbox, you have full access to the Akapi APIs. So you can build an app directly from your sandbox using the credentials you've already created and go into the UI of Traction to see what's going on, but also just use the API. So it's a pretty nice environment. It gets reset. The sandbox gets reset every couple of weeks, every 1st and 15th of the month. But anyone is always welcome to create a new tenant and to use it. So yeah, I had the team at it's been a team at BC Gov that's been building that, and it's just looking really, really good. In the BC world, we've got a dev test and prod instance where actual applications are built. Of course, persistent environments where teams can add digital trust to their line of business application, and then just use the tenant in dev test and prod to promote it, test it, and use it in production.
Stephen, do you have a link for that?
I will. Yes.
It sounds also like there's enough interest that we should
yeah,
schedule you for a demo here on this call at some point.
And I'm just being the front man, so maybe we'll figure out who should do it. Emiliano, Jamie Hale's been working on it. A bunch of people, have done a pile of work on it. So looking forward to that. Yeah, Warren's just put the sandbox in there, and then I'll put the repo for Traction. If you want to deploy Traction, of course, yourself. So there's sort of two things we're talking about here, which is Traction, which is the environment, but then the sandbox is the framework. But the sandbox is something you can use yourself. You can just sign up for and play with, sort of a software as a service type thing.
Sam, it just happens to be that we are planning to have a Menti presentation in 2 weeks' time about the UniFi project for Aries VCX, and I believe that our Menti is building is going to be demoing the app using Traction.
Oh, excellent.
Nice.
So probably won't be can't talk about
Yeah.
internal. Still, I think worthwhile having someone demoing from the backend side, but I guess indirectly we'll get a little sneak peek into that.
Awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to make myself a note. Cool. Great. Cool. Okay. Any other, thanks Warren for calling Stephen out like that. That's awesome. Any other project updates we want to share?
Logo updates.
Yes, that's first on the, you're jumping ahead.
Oh,
there,
okay. Sorry.
Any other project updates? Release status?
I
Okay.
expect the Aries Accreta to have its request to move over to Hyperledger later this week.
Awesome. That's cool. Awesome. Okay, so agenda. The aforementioned logo update from Alex, and then we have 3 kind of things here in a row. We might not get to these other ones just yet. That's okay. I think these top 3 are a little bit more important. First, Jamie Hale for a plugin repo demo. Stephen Kern talking about Pleasac, and then I wanted to lightly cover the purpose of Aries RFCs and what they could look like in the future as 3 topics. If we have time, we can do open discussion or an update on the long-term support policy and where we are on unqualified DIDs, though this has been heavily discussed in the past couple of weeks, and so those would be lighter updates. Before we jump into Alex first on the agenda, are there any updates or changes that we want to make to the agenda? Awesome. And to be clear, we love people suggesting topics for the agenda. So these we come up with stuff to talk about, but and when there's offers, we love those. So please, if there's anything you'd love to share with the community, or lead a discussion, or show something, or even ask a question, even if you don't have the answers, but would love some discussion in the community, we very much welcome those. You're welcome to reach out to me on all of the available channels, and I will get you on the schedule. And so it's that's much appreciated. Okay, with that, Alex, logo updates. And do you want the screen, or is there something I can?
No. It's a verbal update. It was a very grand introduction for a very small update, which is we're just picking the logo this week, and we're talking with Linux Foundation about the final choice. So that's just going ahead. I think what's happening is, of the 3 choices people saw in Discord, the one with the triangle pattern with the 3 dots for the nodes is the winner. But that'll be much more clear when we pick it. They were all good ones. So we're just going to finalize that, and just remind about the marketing meeting for everybody who wants to join in for this kind of discussion and more last Tuesday of the month.
Yes.
Anything else, Helen? Cover everything off there. He says, suddenly asking to be on mic, or maybe you weren't ready.
No. Yeah, I think along those lines, the next marketing meeting, we will be discussing more about creating some content, some kind of onboarding content for new folks to the community, where to kind of pick up, whether that's a white paper or series of kind of essays or something like that. But we are going to be looking at how to create kind of more messaging and content to help grow our community. So if you'd like to take part in that effort, or if there's somebody on your team, say a business decision type person or business development type person or product owner, we would absolutely love to have more input in that effort. So please join us.
Folks, this is your chance to get involved in how it's perceived. Make sure that that any understandings are clear from folks that are looking at the project, etc. So this is a valid effort, and I encourage your participation from you or someone on your team that is so minded. Would be very welcome there. There are not crazy technical discussions that occur there, but rather how to message what Aries is and the value that it adds. Excellent. Okay, Jamie Hale, you're up next, and I'm going to give you the screen.
You can see this plugin repo.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been working in the Aries environment for a few months now, and a lot of my work has been to do with Akapai plugins and testing and developing them. So I think I'll start off with like an overview of plugins just for context, and then talk about some of the current problems with plugins, where we want plugins to go, and then where we're at currently. So Akapai plugins, for those of you who don't know, are a way to extend Akapai without actually changing the core of Akapai. You can do things like extend storage. You can change inbound and outbound transits. You can listen to the Akapai event bus, and you can like create and extend DIDCOM protocols. I just want to move this a little bit. Some examples of plugins are, one is in Traction. So we just talked about Traction. Traction, a lot of the features are built as plugins. So Traction has 4 different plugins. One's called Basic Message Storage. And what this does is it saves outgoing and incoming messages into the database. So you have a history of all your messages. So that can be really useful. Another one that BCGov did is called Redis Events. And this changes inbound and outbound transit to use Redis instead of HTTP. So it uses a Redis queue. And this is really useful because messages aren't lost, they're saved in the Redis queue. Unlike HTTP, where if you have networking problems, you can lose messages. And then finally, one more is in a mediator service. There's a plugin called Firebase Push Notifications, and this creates a DIDCOM protocol with mobile agents, and then it listens to the event bus, and when it sees it has a mediated message, it can notify the mobile agent with a push notification. So there's so many different things you can do with plugins. They're really important for applications. But there is problems with plugins right now in general. One of them being that they're scattered all over the place. So companies and people are making their own plugins. A lot of them are probably doing the same things that people have already done. And it's really hard to find them, know where they are, and use them in your own applications. Another one is they don't really have like a defined structure, and they don't really have like a defined way of testing them. There's probably quite a few out there that like just aren't tested well at all. And then another problem is there's dependency mismatch. So as a direct dependency with Akapai, so there's a lot of plugins out there that aren't updating Akapai, and then vice versa, there's new versions of new agents using old versions of plugins. There's currently a discussion right now about how to deal with this mismatch issue. So what we want from plugins is we want them to be well tested. We want them we want to encourage collaboration. We want to encourage people to be writing tests for plugins. We want them to have a consistent structure. And then we want to be able to keep them up to date with Occupy. So yeah, where we're at right now is we have 4 plugins. These are all well tested with integration and unit tests. 3 of these are from Traction, and then one's the Redis event plugin. And then I'll just show it on VS Code instead. So if you go into these, they all have the exact same structure. So they have a parent folder. They have the actual plugin folder. So this is really similar to protocols in Occupy. So you have a definition folder, and then you have a version path, and this is where all your code will be and your unit test. So you can create another version of the plugin if you want. They all have the same development environment. So they each have a dev container. They each have a launch file for VS Code. They have a Docker repo, which has a way to deploy it, and configuration files. And then they all have a suite of integration tests. And then they'll all have a poetry configuration file. So this is where you configure Occupy. And it will have, a lot of them will have common dependencies, but they'll be able to have additional dependencies. And then they'll all have the same linting rules and testing configurations. So if you go into any of these, they'll have the exact same structure. They'll all have unit and integration tests. And then I wanted to show how easy it is to use one of these plugins. So in the Redis event plugin, I actually, in the integration test, I used the basic message storage plugin for testing. So all you have to do is pip install directly from the repo. And then in the configuration file, you just add the plugin here as a configuration. So it's super easy to use plugins from this repo in any Occupy agent. And then the final thing I wanted to show is just that currently we're running workflows for the integration tests and the linting and unit tests. So any plugin that gets added to this will have all the unit tests and linting and unit tests run. And then what we want to be able to do is upgrade Occupy at any time. Anytime there's an Occupy upgrade, we'd have to go to each of these folders, upgrade it, and then push it to the repo. And then all the tests would run, and we could be fairly confident that nothing's broken. And then we could tag it and have it available for download. So that's all I wanted to show.
Jamie, what is the tagging plan? I noticed there aren't any tags yet.
No, there's still like the discussion going on.
Okay.
What I want to do is tag it like as the same as Occupy.
Yeah.
So as soon as 0.11 is deployed, you'd upgrade it and then tag this as 0.11 or something like that. But the plan is still up in the air a little bit.
Okay. And that would be across the entire repo.
Yeah, I think every single plugin should be
Yeah.
upgraded at the same time. And if there's issues, then we should fix them before tag it and stuff like that. So then if you want to use an old version of a plugin, like say you're still on 10.3 or whatever, you can just use that tag of that plugin. You know, everything's going to work the way it was before.
Cool.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So this is pretty cool the way that it is included in Akapai, etc. Out of this repo. Is it still the intention that plugins outside of this repo will still be supported?
Yes. So there's still going to be plugins all over the ecosystem. Whether they work or not is up to whoever is using them. But all the ones in this repo will know they work and that they're supported by
So it's like a officially supported plugins.
Yes,
Right,
exactly.
right. I also noticed there's a license file at the top, which means that all of the plugins abide the same license.
Yes,
Right?
I'm not super familiar with any of this stuff, but this was added by Jason Sherman, I think.
Cool. This is plugins have come a long way. This is really neat.
Yeah, really. It just makes it so you can do so many different things with Akapai without actually having, like, you still need to know Akapai to be able to do stuff with the plugins, but it's so nice to not have to make changes to Akapai itself and have all your code separate.
Awesome. Other comments, questions on the Akapai plugin repo?
Has there been any thought to putting these into submodules instead of directly in the Git repository? This might support the concept of being a central listing of plugins, even plugins that don't belong in the project for either political licensing or other reasons.
I'm not fully aware of any plans like that. I was basically given the repo with one plugin in it, and then I started adding features to it. But any conversations on the direction of the repo are welcome. I think that could be a good idea as well to support submodules, but there's nothing right now. The concern with submodules and stuff like that too is, like, it comes back to keeping the exact same structure and keeping everything updated. So as long as they're like as long as the submodule is following the same structure as everything else, then I think it could work. But if it's doing a completely different thing than the rest of the plugins, then it's going to get really messy.
Oh yeah, and if submodules were used, that could actually be a requirement for them to be included in the repo, is that they follow a standard format.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be the most important thing about this plugin going forward, is that all of them are following the exact same format, just for maintenance of the repo. Because
is there a CLI or anything to like scaffold out a new template that would fit?
Yeah, so there's actually an issue for that, and I'm working on it currently. But be able to make, I want a script so you can make a brand new plugin with all the scaffolding there. And then another one would be to like actually update the dependencies just from a command line tool. So all the global dependencies would overwrite the plugin. So because we plan to have at least dozens of plugins in this repo at some point. So
Nice.
managing it's going to be work.
So Colton, you had a question, comment, something in the chat that I think is relevant here about tagging with Akapai. Would you be willing to draw that out a little?
Oh yeah, yeah. So when tagging a release, you're basically kind of locking it in stone because a tag is a reference to a single commit. And if you tag in line with Akapi and there is some form of critical bug that needs to be patched across multiple releases, like say a security bug, for instance, it's not as easy to move those tags when you're patching across, like, say, 5 different releases or something. What are the sort of plans in the case of you need to patch a plugin or a series of plugins, and you need that in the latest release for multiple releases, but you don't, like, Akapi isn't updating because it's not a bug in Akapi?
Yeah. I think the whole tagging thing is like still a little bit up in the air in general. So I think we need to have conversation about it and have a concrete plan going forward. But stuff like that is a concern, especially like when we're not going to like manually test every single plugin. We're just going to have our integration and unit tests. So that's like basically the only thing that we're deciding that the plugins are good to go or not. So
Food for thought on that matter, just as you're still thinking about that. Branches are another alternative, like say release slash and then whatever the release is, because branches are a lot easier to move than a tag, and effectively kind of the same thing.
yeah, so that might be a good idea for sure.
That came up in our discussion for the long-term support releases as well last week. I have not yet made that change, but that was one of the discussion items that came up as a better strategy. Steven, your hand is up.
Yeah, one of the things that we should add, and that someone could add fairly quickly, and eventually I'll try to get to it, is putting a make docs generator on this so that we can have a published website for marketing purposes, so that everyone knows what plugins are there, what level they support, and things like that. So we can just have a AkapaiPlugins.org repo that people can look at and have a human readable, nicely presented way to see all the plugins. That should be pretty easy. And again, enforcing by having the maintainers of the plugin repo enforce the structure, make sure that before a plugin gets merged, it has the right structure, has all the right pieces to it. We get the integration testing, the unit testing, we get the documentation generation and things like that. So that would really help. So the maintainers aren't enforcing what the plugin does, but they are enforcing that it is the right format and has all the right pieces necessary.
One of the things that you just mentioned was that the maintainers would make sure that it's the correct format before merging. That could also be done by a merge script, kind of like one of the integration tests. So in order for the quote unquote test to pass, in order to merge, it has to be in that following format.
Yeah,
machine readable governance. I like it. Sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
No, I was just saying we should for sure have something like that.
Awesome. Other comments, questions about the Akapi plugin repo?
Do we have this kind of structure for the other projects? I know AFJ has a number of plugins.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Do other projects have plugin repos, is what he was asking.
So the AFJ project has a whole bunch of packages, and those are included within the AFJ project directly. And then there's extensions, which is stuff not in the core AFJ umbrella. And those live separately. And I think those to this point have been in like their own repos and haven't been aggregated into a single plugins repo. But that's sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good intel. Anything else? Jamie, thank you for presenting on this. Good work. Appreciate your efforts. Next on the list is Stephen.
Given the time, do you want to do your things first, or and we defer this, or do you want me to go ahead?
That's a good question. Why don't I talk about the Aries RFC purpose and then drop to you?
Okay.
I think the other things are less important. Okay. Let me share the right window. There's been some questions, not just in discussion to the long-term support release stuff about last week, but also just previously, and as it relates to other things like, for example, the DIDCOM users group over in the diff, and what happens and what the both the purpose and the current purpose and the potential future purpose of the Aries RFC repo is. So this is at Aries-RFCs. And the README here has a bunch of info that kind of describes the process. And I will be the first to mention that we are not perfect maintainers of the vision of Aries RFCs, and I'll point something about that out in a second. But there's two types of Aries RFCs that exist. One is a features, and the other one is a concept. And there's different folders for these to go in. They are numbered all in one collection. There's not like concept numbers and feature numbers just for confusion's sake, but they're different types of things. And so most of or all of the DIDCOM protocols that have been defined in the Aries community were defined in features. Lots of other things like concepts or practices or sort of generalized ways of thinking about things have all landed in concepts, and that's important. The Aries as a project is not a single code base, but rather a collection of code bases that are working towards common goals. And so there's a number of functions that the RFCs provide for us. One of them is the exploration of new concepts as a community. Sometimes a new concept is developed elsewhere that we adopt. Presentation exchange is a good example of that. But sometimes there hasn't been another place to have those discussions, and that's especially true historically. DIDCOM v1 exists within the collection of RFCs that describe all of the relevant pieces. DIDCOM v2 actually happened in a different place. That happened over at the Decentralized Identity Foundation in a spec working group there, and now there's a user group there talking about that as well. And so now that there is in fact a place for that to happen, then that's often better that they happen in those other places. Aries was an early leader in the development of, at the sake of getting the rotten fruit thrown at me, a full stack solution for verifiable credentials and identity. There are not very many other projects, and we were certainly the largest initial effort at producing things that were software that actually served all the way from DIDs, et cetera, all the way up to communicating things like verifiable credentials. And at the times, there wasn't always good places to figure out the details of how that would actually work. And so the Aries project was a way to coordinate amongst the various projects that existed. And that, of course, includes things like Aries VCX and Akapai and all the other projects to work together and make it interoperable. We also have the Aries interop profiles, which are themselves defined in RFCs, to provide a fixed development pattern for projects that are seeking to achieve interoperability on a fixed thing while things continue to develop. And so all of those things land here. So there are things that have landed on RFCs that probably shouldn't in the future. For example, a non-Aries specific DIDCOM protocol probably belongs over in the on didcom.org and discussion in the DIDCOM users group over there. Things that do relate. We've talked recently, for example, there is DID rotation that exists within the Aries RFC repo, and while it isn't specifically related to the Aries project, it was created here because this is the largest community of DIDCOM v1 adopters, and it's specifically a DIDCOM v1 problem. And so rather than create it and discuss it wholly in the DIDCOM users group, this was a good place for that to happen. Because it concerns sort of the historical nature of the Aries project and how we get out of that, how we solve the problems that we've had in the future, so that we can be more interoperable with folks that are targeting DIDCOM v2 adoption, and that's part of that process, right? And so that's why that's landed here. But by and large, most of the protocols I imagine us wanting in the future are more generalized than just Aries, and so working on them elsewhere and then adopting them or even targeting them within an interop profile is perfectly appropriate. And so the discussion came up. This, by the way, so there's also the index RFCs. One of the issues, as a side note, that we have not done very well, there is an adopted status, and a ton of the stuff in the accepted category, it actually belongs in adopted, but we've not gone through and updated the status of those at the rate that we should have in order to make that more clear. That isn't because they're not adopted, it's just that we haven't done the repo work to properly represent those things. And so there's definitely status issues that need to move around, not just with accepted to adopted, but other ones as well. And that is something that we should be doing a better job with. And one of the things to call out. Stephen has also mentioned that it would be much more friendly if we actually had a rendered copy of this that called things out and organized differently, kind of in a generated markdown site style, in order to avoid people needing to wade through markdown files in a repository directly, which is what this has you do, right? If you click on something here, then it actually takes you just to the markdown file, and it works well enough, but it's a little unfriendly for folks that are not super oriented towards GitHub. Particularly those that are looking at more of the concept high-level things and not necessarily the technical details, which may not be developer-oriented folks. And so anyway, that's a little bit of background about this. So in the future, we're still going to have Aries RFCs, even if there are places where work does belong that has previously been here. Having Aries RFCs to coordinate the efforts within Aries projects will continue to be appropriate as long as the Aries project exists. As that's kind of the goal that we have, is to coordinate among different efforts, and that's still going to be a need in the future, even if work is actually now happening in other places to great effect. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up. It was brought up, for example, on the long-term support pull request by Timo, that he felt like this was not an appropriate thing to be in an RFC, and it is a concept RFC as a way to sort of guide the projects within Aries in a common way that serves all of the needs that we have. In particular, the ability to identify a target in a cross-project way, so that you can pull the long-term support release of one project and have some confidence that it is compatible with the long-term support of another project that is targeting the same the same profile and the same goals. And so I believe that still very much follows within the collection of Aries RFCs that should exist in the future. That is, those that exist to coordinate the efforts within the Aries community to make that happen. Timo is right in that work is needed in all of the individual projects to make it so, but having sort of a central place to sort of coordinate or design the generalized effort, I think is useful from a community perspective, both for those inside of it that are seeking to satisfy long-term support goals, but also those outside of it who are looking at Aries and trying to understand how to approach the project, or what they should be involved in, or which releases of which software they ought to be using. And that external visibility is often a very powerful thing. in the sort of having an RFC in the generalized sense that describes this concept and best practices, I think is a really useful thing to exist in the community. So I've said a lot of words. I would love to hear feedback or questions about this, so that if there's any confusion or better ideas or things that we ought to be doing, that we can highlight those. And Kim's got his hand up, so we'll start with Kim.
One of the first things that occurs to me is that the Aries RFC started off as a very technical oriented RFCs repository. And so features and concepts were very much of a technical orientation. And I think as the project continues, I think we're running into non-technical aspects that delve into politics or community coordination and things like that. And so perhaps introducing a third type of RFC, perhaps called policy RFCs, might be a way to help distinguish between the two.
Example, just to drive the point home.
An example would be coordinating the technical migration of the what's the term, the DID,
unqualified DIDs.
Unqualified DID community coordinated update.
Yep. Okay,
exactly.
Good. That's where I thought you were going, but I just wanted to drive it.
So there's from the current way that's organized, uncommon with no commentary about what we should do in the future, is that there is a concept RFC describing community coordinated updates and how the process should happen, and then there are feature RFCs that designate the actual existing ones that are as defined, and that's how it's currently done. That's offers no comment on how it could apply to policies. Thoughts? Questions?
My choice of words with policy isn't necessarily one of indicating that's the correct term, but perhaps a separation of technical versus non-technical RFCs.
And as an alternative term, Daniel has suggested potentially the word community instead.
I think the technical versus non-technical is interesting. When you first said that, I went to like UX design in my head, not actually like protocol versus non-protocol, because like the community coordinated update has a lot of technical aspects to it, because it's a technical problem we're seeking to solve, even though the actual operation of the thing itself is not really defining something new from a technical perspective.
Yes, protocol versus non-protocol might be a better term there.
I actually think that the protocol RFCs in the future will be substantially diminished in quantity, maybe even rare, simply because most of the things we want to do in the Aries community is also a desire for the community at large. And so I can see technical RFCs actually decreasing in number substantially. I don't know how this relates to this, but just simply because there are other definitions happening in other places.
Move into other places where they are more appropriate, like the diff.
Yeah, like the diff user group or other communities as it relates. Right now, well, I'll give you an example. So Polygon they use DIDCOM, but they have different needs for their credential issuance and revocation stuff because of the way that Polygon credentials are designed. So they created a set of DIDCOM protocols that serve their needs. They're still using DIDCOM itself, but then the protocols they have designed are within that specific community for their purpose. right? And so even those are not necessarily, don't need to necessarily be discussed over at the DIDComm users group, but they exist as sort of created protocols for a community. Aries, given the fact that we generally want to create working software packages that serve the needs of digital identity and verifiable credentials, et cetera, is general enough at this point that that often those sort of very specific things occur appropriately elsewhere, like the creation of the Polygon DIDComm protocols for their purposes. And I think that in the future, there'll be protocols created in banking industry consortiums and in farmers co-ops and in other places that are more specific to the nature of the problem they're looking to solve with DIDComm protocols, for example. I think that generalized groups like both Aries as implementations and the DIDComm users group as sort of the general design of things will continue to serve a really important role for either generalized protocols or making or being able to spread knowledge around these things. But anyway, that's a little bit of forward thinking about where we think it might go. In the meantime, the right place for a whole bunch of that discussion is in fact the users group at the diff as sort of the general body concerned around the use of an application of DIDComm. Patrick, your hand's up.
Yeah, just one random specific question. Where do you see DIDComm v2 issue / presentation v3 protocols to be residing? Is that going to be under Aries RFCs?
No, I don't anticipate that should be the case in the future. Now, version 2 is already defined here. Version 3 has kind of been the adaptation of those to DIDComm v2, but I expect future credential protocol discussions actually to happen in the DIDComm users group. We can surface these things here, but from a collaborative design perspective, this is probably the wrong scope of community to do that. Now, we can, like, if we decided to, no one's going to like push us off a wall, but I think that if we're seeking to sort of find the right home for the work, the right home for that credential related protocol work is likely within the DIDComm users group.
So if that's the approach, should we merge this meeting with the DIDComm user group and try to get one meeting and move that forward? Why are we having separate ones if that's where we think it's going to go?
That's not inappropriate, but there's a large number of the conversations we've had, particularly recently, actually don't have anything to do with the DIDComm users. The community coordinated updates, for example, around Aries projects are not a DIDComm users group concern. The DID rotation isn't really a DIDComm users group concern either, because that's on DIDComm v1, not on DIDComm v2. So we could, and I think that in the future that could be a decent adaptation. But given the volume of stuff we've talked about, including our own discussion here today on the plugin repo, is actually not a DIDComm concern. That's a software architecture concern as it relates to Aries. I do think that there needs to be generally more activity in the DIDComm users group, and if we coordinate between the communities to figure out maybe an alternating of schedules or something that actually makes sense, I think that would be good. But I want to highlight that there are still very Aries specific topics that are under very regular discussion.
So it seems like we are in a direction where Aries is essentially a specific niche, a subset of diff concerns, right? So I was just thinking perhaps because the DIDComm v2 ultimately is where we're heading, and that's under diff and Aries. As you listed these topics, there exist topics which are specific to us, but not necessarily diff concerns, but pretty much everything what's a diff concern is going to be our concern, since you also said that the future credential exchange protocol would likely be under diff. So I'm just thinking, I don't know, coordination wise, maybe it will be good to promote these diff calls a bit more. I found it difficult to find out, when they are and kind of access them. So yeah, perhaps just that it's also a bit unfortunate timing, honestly, because in Central Europe that's like 9 or 10 p.m. But probably not much, we can do about it. I don't know. Just saying, from sharing my experience and thoughts.
That's excellent. Kim?
The other thing to consider here is we might not be limiting ourselves to DIDCOM discussions. Many of the projects are adopting other protocols, and so continuing the Hyperledger Aries working group calls, I think, is valuable as we may be discussing other protocols as well.
Like adoption of the OpenID for VC stuff, for example, just to call one out, right?
Correct.
Totally.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
So
I would agree. I guess my concern is that like we haven't in Aries talked about DIDCOM in 3 years, just because it's there, it works, and we just assume it's there. So this the transition to think that these belong in the DIDCOM working group, and I question that a bit, and that's why I was wondering whether we should be spending more. Yeah, I would agree. There's an awful lot that doesn't relate to DIDCOM. We just assume DIDCOM is there.
But it does work, and it does come up. So I'll point out that that Colton Wilkins, present in our midst, is a co-chair of the DIDCOM users group over there. And so I know he's been paying attention and listening to the stuff we brought up. Not
Yeah,
the
and I
point
was
to
just
paint a target on you, Colton, but
you're good. I was just going to mention, similar to like what you said about how we assume that DIDCOM is just there. It's the same kind of thing with WebSockets or HTTP. We kind of just assume that the technologies are there. We can build stuff on top of them, but the protocols themselves are, we build on top of them. We assume that they're there and working. And that's kind of the motivation for moving it out into its own thing, as it's more akin to like HTTP or WebSockets, where that development has happened elsewhere, and then the Aries stuff is just building on top of it.
yes, and the there are things that I think would improve that. Having more visible agendas and meeting recordings, I think, would be of assistance to those in awkward time zones or whatever else. I think a consideration of time zone is another item there. There's definitely some stuff there. So Danielle has a good question, and we are over time. I'll wrap this up really quick. Can Aries still incubate protocols? I think that we can imagine protocols, but the formalization and the deeper discussion, I think, ought to happen within a larger community to make that happen. I think that from an incubation perspective, trying things out is still perfectly appropriate. But certainly sort of trying things out and then seeking to have the larger discussion as a polished nature, I think there is fine. Aries can also just create protocols for our own use should we find something that isn't really scoped to all of DIDCOM but only within Aries. Again, I think those are going to be relatively rare, but that is something we can still do. And we are out of time. Stephen, thanks for letting me jump the queue on that topic. And these are I want to bring some of these topics back up again in future calls. Specifically, I want to readdress the type of RFC thing that Kim brought up, because I think there's some good stuff there, and we'll keep going there. Thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate the discussion today. Thanks. Thank you to Jamie for presenting excellent work there, and we will see you all in 2 weeks, as there won't be a call next week. Thanks, folks. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.